Hey, thanks for checking in. I want to go over the paperwork that's used when you talk with the seller of property. The paperwork is in the order, for the most part, that I would present it to a seller. And I just wanted to go through and chat about some of the things that I say or why I say certain things as I go through the property. Some of the, actually, all of these forms that are in the presentation that you're going to see now are ones that I have in a template folder for listings. So when I do a listing in .loop, I create a loop and then copy whatever forms in this folder that I need for the transaction. Sometimes there may be an agricultural disclosure that sometimes you need, sometimes you don't. So some things, it's not like I always copy all of these, but we'll talk through that as we go. Okay, so I'm going to switch over and we're going to go through each of those forms now. And the first form that I always start with is the agency disclosure form. Again, these forms are New York State specific, and some of them are specific to eXp Realty. For the most part, all of these forms, if you have your client sign them, if you're with eXp Realty, then these have to be uploaded into SkySlope where the transaction's managed as well. So when we're going through this, what I obviously the most important part is I'm a seller's agent. And so this is the primary part that I talk about. I also talk about dual agent and then dual with designated agent. Again, that's specific to New York State, but I usually tell a seller that a lot of these disclosures and forms are because there are rules and laws that say what you need to be told as a consumer. So all of these forms are us telling you whatever the information is, in this case, who I represent as an agent and how I represent you. But it also signs off acknowledging that, when you sign, that's acknowledging that I've told you what I have to tell you. That's explained on the form that you're signing. So it's just kind of one of those things. Probably, it's like when you go to the doctor's office and you have to sign the same privacy disclosure form every single time. It's kind of like that. All right. So this is a New York State Department of State form. When I'm a listing agent talking to a seller, I say that obviously you're a seller of the property and I'm your agent. So I'm a seller's agent. And I explain to them that everything we talk about is private and confidential. Whatever I talk about isn't shared with people, and certainly not other agents that are, outside of eXp Realty. So that's an important thing to remember. I got to silence my phone and my computer so we don't hear all kinds of random noises. But it is thunder and lightning out, so we'll see. Hopefully the power will hold out. So I tell them that, the things that I owe them as far as a fiduciary responsibility include reasonable care in dealing with them, undivided loyalty, confidentiality, full disclosure, obedience, and duty to account. So what that says is that I need to be the professional that I am to do the things that I'm trained to do and to represent them well. Okay? I also tell them that in circumstances where a buyer reaches out to me directly, and I tell them that happens a lot because I put a sign in your yard that has my phone number on it. So often people call me off the sign. Go figure, right? But I want to make sure that they understand that when that happens, I'm still their agent representing them in their interests. It doesn't mean that I'm being, deceitful or whatever to that buyer or even to the buyer's agent if they reach out. But it talks about that right here in the form. In dealing with a buyer, a seller's agent should exercise reasonable skill and care and performance in the duties. In other words, do your job well and do your job right. Deal with them honestly, fairly, and in good faith. You don't lie to them. You don't stretch the truth. You tell them, here's what it is, right? But there are certain things that still maintain that we keep between me and the seller. And that's, private things about what lowest price would they take, or when are they going to talk about a price change, or even why are they moving? Maybe they don't want people to know why they're moving. It's none of anybody's business. You want to buy the house or not? And usually what I say, for the most part, if I'm a buyer's agent and the buyer says, well, do you know why they're moving? It's like it's not something that's disclosed. Maybe they want to downsize or they're changing jobs. Who knows? But Doesn't really affect our purchase, does it? Nope, of course not. Okay, so that talks about the seller's agent. And then when I talk about the dual agent, and it's important to, as an agent, to read the form and understand and know the language that's there. Okay, but I also don't read the form to my client because they can read. Hopefully, they can read, and I'm not going to insult them by reading a form to them, right? I'm going to say, if there's a situation where I've been working with a buyer for a long time and I know their private and personal information, just like I know yours over on this side, there may be situations where your house is the one that they want to buy or that they want to look at. So in a case like that, I have to compartmentalize my loyalty. And that's a situation where I can't give the seller, It's undivided loyalty. Because I've also been working with this other client, maybe for longer. So what you have to do is you have to keep that information separate. It's like what I know about the seller is private between me and the seller. What I know with the buyer is private between me and the buyer. However, the hard part is that you can't really say to a buyer that you've been working with a long time as a dual agent, well, I think you should offer $10,000 under the list price, because then you're not representing your seller, right? So in a case of a dual agency, you really can't advise a buyer about what price to offer. Here's the list price. Tell me what number you want me to put down. That's what you have to do. And then on the seller side, okay, well, we got for an offer from your client $15,000 less. What do you think we should do? What number do you want me to counter at? You can't advise them at that. So it's not always easy to do dual agent when you've been, obviously you've been working with both parties. However, I'm just going to jump forward. If it's a buyer that calls my sign and I don't know them from Adam, then I'm gonna check on here that for a buyer. Again, I'm jumping to the other side, but for a buyer, you're a buyer and I'm a seller's agent. That's what that means. So that means somebody who calls my sign, I'm going to say that I'm a seller's agent. And in dealing with the buyer, here are the things that I'm going to do. And I'm going to explain that to them. So I can still represent you fairly, because that's one of my duties, and in good faith and honestly. But I can't disclose anything that's private with the seller. So it's important that you remember who your loyalties lie with, okay? So jumping back to the seller discussion, that's kind of how I process and handle dual agency and kind of how I talk about it, all right? And if they want more information, certainly they're going to get a copy of this form as well. And then the other one that I explain is dual agent with designated sales representatives. That means that it's dual agent, not just with me, but another broker in my office. If you remember the listing paperwork, and we're going to get to ours farther down, they're not listing their property with James Jock, superstar real estate agent, associate broker, right? No, they're listing it with the brokerage. And then you happen to be the agent that's doing the paperwork, right? So when they list with the broker, any agent in that brokerage has the same duty and obligation as a seller's agent listed here, right? So if I, working with a buyer that may call off the sign, am a dual agent, so would another agent in my office, in my brokerage. So what happens in that case is it's dual with designated. And what that means is we would put the names here of the buyer, who's working with the buyer and who's representing the seller in the transaction. And that's if dual with designated is indicated above. What that means is I represent the seller, and everything I know and whatever about the seller is kept on this side, and everything you know, other EXP agent, other same brokerage agent, everything you know about your buyer is kept on that side. So it's like we're with two companies, right? I don't know your client, you don't know mine, everything is private and separated. And then if there's any issue that comes up for resolving or regarding that, then your broker would resolve any issue with the agency, and should I do this, should I do that, okay? So that's what that means. So when I list the property, right, you got your name here, or my name, your brokerage. The type of relationship is either seller or buyer. So if it's a listing, it's a seller. And then how you're representing them. Seller's agent. That's what we do. Okay? For advanced informed consent with either dual agency or dual agent with designated, complete the section below. What this is doing is the seller giving permission ahead of time, number one, for you to work dual agency, which means it's okay if you bring somebody that you've already been working with. All right? And the seller is okay with that undivided loyalty between the buyer and the seller. And it means that dual agency with designated sales agents is okay as well. And that's pretty much the same, except it means another agent from within your brokerage is going to be that other side instead of you. Now, here's the thing with that, though. If you don't check those and tell them about that when you list the property, and another EXP or another broker in your same office brings a client and your seller has not approved that representation setup, they might not be able to show the property because there is no advanced informed consent where the seller will allow that type of relationship on representation to happen. So when you're a listing agent, make sure that you check those because that way it'll always be covered. And if it's not, then what happens is if the buyer's agent brings the agency disclosure form, then the buyers would sign here and the sellers would have to countersign that. And that is granting permission for that type of representation because it wasn't done using advanced informed consent. It wasn't done using the let's do that ahead of time in case that situation arises. That is a much better way to do it, is to address it ahead of time. Okay? So any questions? If you do, put them down in the chat, or you can call my cell phone anytime and I'll answer them for you. Okay? I don't have something I can just turn on while I'm recording. I'm recording this in my studio live. I'm not doing like pieces and parts or whatever, but call my cell anytime if you have questions about paperwork, and I'll be glad to answer them for you if you're in New York State, in my market especially. All right? So the other thing when you fill out this form is you need to make sure that you put the name of the buyers and sellers, whoever is signing below. I, we, and then their names, and then are they the buyer or the seller? This form is pre-filled out because this is how I would represent sellers, and this is all forms that are in my seller folder. So the next form that I always do, and this one again, I don't want to read a form to somebody. I don't necessarily think that we need to read all of the protected classes that are federal and state. But what I usually do is I would explain it something like this. And before I say that, you need to read this. And you need to read this, and you need to make sure you understand what it's saying. Because if you don't understand what it's saying on the form by thoroughly reading it, how can you paraphrase it? Don't paraphrase it based on remembering how Jim did it in the video. No, that's not right. You need to read this, and you need to make sure that you understand all of these examples on the type of discrimination that are happening, right? So if you were a seller, and I'm going through the paperwork, this form is a New York State licensing form. So it's also a Department of State form. This concept has been around for a long time, but the form is relatively new. And this form is called the New York State Housing and Anti-Discrimination Disclosure Form. Sometimes they'll call it the Fair Housing Disclosure. What this says is that during the course of this real estate transaction or viewing the house or whatever, owners or their agents or anybody working for them cannot discriminate against you as a buyer or as a buyer for any protected class. So when I'm talking to my seller, which is how I should have coached it, was during the course of selling your house, we can't discriminate against anybody for any protected class. Those protected classes are listed right here. What those discriminatory characteristics might look like are right here on the form. You can't do that. Can they afford the house? Are they is somebody coming in to look at it? Their agent is going to request it. We can't say no because I had somebody say, well, this house was made for a family, so if you don't have a family, you're wasting my time. True story. And I said, well, ma'am, this is when we had to unlock the door and then let them go in during COVID, 3 at a time. I said, ma'am, you can't really say that because that would violate New York State and federal discrimination and fair housing laws. And she insisted on it anyway. And the form had been released, but not mandatory. I gave it to my client anyway and had him sign it because that person was discriminating against my buyer because they weren't a family. And you can't do that. You can't do that. So I tell the seller, here are the protected classes, and here's what some sample behaviors are that we can't do. All right. So we can't discriminate against anybody for a protected class having anything to do with this housing situation. And if you do, they have the right to file a complaint, and here's how they file the complaint. Do you have any questions about that? Nope. Okay. And then I come down on the next page. I'm Jim Jock, eXp Realty. I'll have their name in here, or I'll put it in. I'll click if they're the seller, and then I'll have them sign. Okay. And then I've complied with this disclosure form. And I like to give them a copy of it as well. Anytime you have a client sign anything, they should get a copy. Matter of fact, I even have it on my folder checklist for listings, and once I'm under contract, I always copy the client. All right. But you should also have some of these extra forms that you can give them so that they sign one and take the other, or sign two and take one, or whatever. But your first substantive contact with them, you need to have them sign these first two forms we've already gone over. Questions about that? I hear none. If you do, just put them in the comment, email to me, james.jock@exprealty.com, or call me on my cell. Be glad to answer questions. I've had funny stuff come up with, a lot of stuff. Okay, so this next form in the listing packet is carbon monoxide and smoke detector alarm disclosure. And that one basically says you got to have those in the house. The only thing that is, carbon monoxide alarms are not required if you have no combustible, either, like if you don't have a gas stove or a gas furnace or anything that burns, then it's not required. So if you have electric heat, electric hot water, electric stove, then the CO2 detector is not required, but the smoke alarm is. So this form, even though buyers are going to have these, they also need to know that as a seller of property, they need to have these in the house. And an appraiser told me, not just laying on the counter like we usually tell them to do, but actually installed. Okay. Next form. Next form is an EPA form. No, this is a sample disclosure form, but this is a lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard disclosure form. And this one is required for any house built since or prior to 1978. So prior to 1978 means if it's built in 1978, that is not prior to 1978. So anything built in 77 or earlier, this form is required. This form is asking the seller to disclose two things. Do you know of any lead-based paint in the house, and have you tested for it? And are there any records or reports available? So are there any known paint or lead-based paint hazards in the house? So as a seller, you're either going to check there are known hazards in the house, or I have no knowledge of any lead-based hazards in the house. And then they check records. The seller has provided the purchaser with no records, or with available records, or no records. So if they check up here, they have no knowledge, then I put that they don't provide any records because there aren't any, because they aren't aware of any. And that means, well, there probably is in that, because that's an old one. If you don't know, you don't know. Only disclose what you know. Okay? And then This form here, C is for purchasers, D is for purchasers, E is for purchasers. The listing agent actually does this one. The agent has informed the seller of their obligation under this law and is aware of their responsibility to ensure compliance. In other words, that means if you know, you got to tell. If you don't know, you don't know. But if you know and you don't want to tell me, too bad, you got to tell me anyway. All right? So that's what it is. You just have to disclose. It doesn't mean you have to get, you have to get rid of or remediate or anything. It's just, this is a disclosure. Do you know? Is there, to the best of your knowledge, that hazard in the house? And then this form is unique because not only will the seller sign this, but so will the listing agent. And then the purchaser sign, and then so does their agent. Okay? This is a notice to seller of residential property saying that, and again, this is a New York State specific law, sellers of real estate have to provide a property condition disclosure statement about their property. It's answering questions about, do you know about the this, that, or the other in your house? Is there mold in the house? That's a new question just added the middle of June 2023. Is have you ever tested for mold? And then are there any records available? So this form isn't the actual disclosure. This one is the one that says, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, if you don't provide this information, then you have to give the purchasers a $500 credit against the purchase of the property when you close. So you can either fill out the 6-page form or you give them $500 at closing. In our market, we always fill it out. In other markets, they never fill it out. So just check and see. All right, and then that's where the seller or sellers would sign. Again, that's just a form that says about their requirement. This is actually the form. I think this is the new one. Is it? Yes, I got the new one in here. So this form I usually send to my client before I meet with them in person or before I go to do pictures and stuff, because it's 6 pages and they got to fill it out and then they got to think about it and then they got to sign it, and then I don't want to have to wait while they do that at the house. So a lot of times I'll send them this ahead of time. Their name's going to be here, the property address, and then they got to go through and check all this stuff off, answer questions about how long have you owned the property, how long have you occupied it, and then yes, no, unknown, or not applicable about all this stuff. Has the property ever been a site of a landfill? I don't know. Well, you probably do, because it probably hasn't. Is there asbestos? I don't know. Well, then hit no. I don't think there is, then I hit no. I have no clue, hit unknown. Okay? Use your best judgment as when you're describing this to the seller. Has a radon test ever been done? I'm just picking random ones. Unknown. Well, have you ever done a radon test? No. Did you get a radon test results when you bought the house? No. Then put no, it's never been, never been done. Because if you hit yes, then you got to attach a copy of the report. So if you don't have a copy of the report, then presume that one wasn't done. Okay? Here's the new question, 19A. It didn't even come to the level of being number 20 and redoing the whole form. Oh, excuse me. So has the property ever been tested for indoor mold? Outdoor mold? Indoor mold. Outdoor mold? I don't know if I've heard of that. So it's asking for indoor mold. If yes, attach a copy of the report. That's it. Okay? Yes, it has. No, it hasn't. Or unknown. I have no clue. It not applicable doesn't apply because you have to answer it one of these ways. All right, structural questions, mechanical questions. Is there a septic or a cesspool? Is it public, private, sewer, septic, whatever, frequency of pumping? Again, as a seller, answer this to the best of your knowledge. Who is the electric service provider? NYSEG, Natural Grid, just put in whatever it is. What's the amperage? Not everybody knows what the amperage is. So you may have to look on the top of the circuit breaker. It's usually the top breaker will have, like if it's 200, it'll have 200, 200 on each parts of the breaker, or 100 or 60. But if it has little round screwy in things, like I'm just kidding. If it has fuses instead of circuit breakers, it's probably going to be 60, but hey, hopefully you don't find that. I didn't get enough sleep last night. So this part is important. Well, it's all important, but this is particularly important because the question is, are there any known material defects in the following? That's not say, I have a plumbing system, so I'm going to hit yes. I don't have a security system, I'll hit no. No. Are there any known defects in any of the following? Plumbing. Is your plumbing working okay? Okay, then no defects. Security system. Do you have one? If you don't have one, it's not applicable. Carbon monoxide detector. If you have one, is it working? Yes, no, or not applicable if you don't have anything that burns that requires that. We just talked about it. Smoke detector should be no known defects. Fire sprinkler, same thing. Most people residential where we are, you don't have them, and just go through. And then this room at the bottom is used if you answer yes and you got to explain why. Okay. And then randomly they want to know what school district you're in. You should be able to fill that in for them. Okay. And then the seller's sign here. And then in our market, this form goes on the listing in the document section. So we're providing this disclosure to anybody who cares. For any agent, like when I show a house, I print out this and I give that to my client with a copy of the tax map and a copy of the listing. So they have a takeaway, and that's part of the value we show, right? So the buyer's acknowledgement, well, when do you have to sign that? If you bring an offer on the property, then you need to have your buyers sign this disclosure right here, right? Acknowledging the disclosure made by the sellers in this document. That's how it's done. You disclose and we acknowledge your disclosure. Agricultural activity disclosure. This is used if you have agricultural activity on or near your property. If there are cornfields, if there are some type of crop fields or livestock pens or big red silos with red barns next to it across the street, then you're going to fill this out. And the way I describe it is you're just acknowledging that they might spread poop on the fields twice a year, or cows might be doing what cows do to make more cows. You're acknowledging that. Okay. I know it sounds kind of funny, but that is what it is. And then the subject address, the listing address, the seller sign, that goes on. But if you're not near any of that, then this isn't needed. Okay. This is the actual listing document. Okay. This is the contract that we make with the seller. And this starts out with, this is an exclusive right to sell contract, which means, this is just how I paraphrase it, I'm not an attorney, and if I was, it wasn't yours, right? I like that line. An exclusive right to sell contract means that once we sign this document and I start marketing and advertising and working on selling your property like you've asked me to do, then regardless of where the buyer comes from, it's still covered by this listing agreement. So if your neighbor said, hey, can I changed my mind, I want to buy it, do we have to go through your agent, or can I just do it, and save you the time and hassle or whatever? Not that it's a hassle to list with me. Come on now. All right. But in a case like that, no, I'm sorry, it's listed, so it's got to follow through. It's going to be covered by the listing agreement. And you know what? A lot of times sellers don't want to talk to their neighbors and start negotiating with them. I usually tell them, it's like, if you have a neighbor or somebody that you know that asks about it, get their contact information and get it to me, and I'll give them a call. Answer any questions they have, and that way it gives you the important degree of separation from you're a good neighbor and I'm telling you things I don't want you that you don't want to know about my house, or that you don't like about my house, or how much I'm selling and you think it's too much, or whatever. just keep being good neighbors and let me give them the reality of life when it comes to selling a property, okay? So that's how I explain the exclusive right to sell. I have that right up front. Number one, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to read through this bit by bit, but right here I'm going to fill in eXp Realty as the broker. That's usually in my template, but it's not because I think they updated and I forgot to add it to my template. And then the listers of the property. Yeah, okay, I'm tired, right? The owners of the property are put in this line here, right? If there's 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, however, I think 5 or 6 is the most I had on one. So this lists you as the seller of the property. This lists the property address. We're listing it for this price from today until this time. Usually 6 months. Land, I'll usually go a year. Okay? And this says that you give eXp Realty, and me in particular, permission to put this in the multiple listing system. And it will be in the multiple listing system within 3 business days following the signing of this contract. However, sometimes you'll sign with a start date here that's in the future, or like I had a property where we're going to market it off. I was going to market it off market for 2 weeks before we listed, so I penciled in here somewhere in the MLS on such and such a date. I initialed, they initialed, and then it was good to go. So then I had the listing. It wasn't active in the MLS, but I was covered by the listing agreement because of the way that was done. Okay? And I'm going to pause here a minute. Sorry for that quick break. Had to answer a couple emails. Anyway, actually text messages. So, again, this is how I'm explaining the listing agreement to the seller of a property. Fair housing. There's a fair housing notice in this contract. Now there's a whole separate form that we already went over, but there's also a fair housing notice here that say that you can't discriminate against people for protected classes for, in the dealing with the sale of your house. Okay, here you're authorizing me to put a for sale sign on your property unless they don't want one, but I always try and get them to do that. And to market and advertise your property and cooperate with other brokers and do all types of marketing things using pictures, videos, whatever I can to sell your property. Any questions about that? That's pretty much how I do it. Exclusive right to sell and the agent disclosure. This talks more about if the owner of the property finds a buyer and stuff like that. It just has that in here as well. Number 6, inspection contingency. Many buyers bring contracts with an inspection contingency in there. It's the beginning part of once we're under contract, and just want you to know that that's common. Rental of the property. I always put not applicable because my understanding is you're looking to sell the property, not rent the property. Correct? Correct. Next paragraph. Applications of deposits. This number, I always put 0. Other brokerages put either a dollar figure or a percent there. What that deals with is if we're under contract and somebody withdraws from the contract for reasons not allowed in the contract, then you can keep their escrow deposit typically. If that happens, me putting a 0 means that I don't want any part of that deposit and you get it, and that I'm just going to put the house back on the market. All right? And that's what that means. And some brokers put $3,000 in that if it's a house. I've always put 0. The board and the multiple listings service are not agents. They're organizations that are in the background that help agents like me sell properties. Buyer agency. You authorize me to cooperate with other agents who may have buyers, and I don't know who those buyers are, but their agents do. And this just says that you're giving me permission to cooperate, which is pretty much what we have to do because those are rules of the National Association of Realtors. All right. Thank you. Broker's fee, when amount due and when. Broker's fee, amount when due and payable. This is actually interesting because I've had situations where we've had to do option C. So typically what happens is the first part of this is if prior to the expiration of my listing, somebody comes through the property, looks at the property, and then for some reason we don't sell the property, but they came through when the listing expired. If as long as you don't list with another broker, they are covered by the listing agreement for a period of, and I usually put 12 months in that block because the way I tell people is because people will play games and they'll say, well, I'll just wait out the listing. I'll buy it from you direct and Jim can go find something else to sell and get paid from something else. So in other words, it's people trying to avoid the listing agreement. So if somebody sees the house during the listing period, they're covered for a year after. A year. Unless you relist, then they're covered by that. All right? Because when I first got into real estate, the brokerage I was at, they would put 3 months. Okay, so let's think about that. Take the house off in November, December, because they don't want to shovel snow. January, February, March. We still have snow. Come on back on the market in April. All right. So 3 months is not a long time to put there. So that's why I put 12. You want people covered for a longer period of time so that people don't play games. It's just what you have to do. Now, during the period of this contract, if the owner himself sells or agrees to sell the property without talking to his agent, then he still has to pay the commission. At the time of closing, you may be required to deposit the broker's commission in the county clerk in the event that you do not pay the broker his or her commission as set forth herein. Your obligation to deposit the broker's commission with the county clerk may be waived by the brokerage, but doesn't mean that it is. So I had happen twice. Where I found out, hey, I heard somebody bought that property. They were talking about it at the planning board. What are you talking about? So I look it up. And my sign's still in the building. And yeah, so we had to file this document with the county clerk office. The office's attorney put it together, and I still have a copy in Word. That basically said that this part of the contract is not waived, and it's filed with the clerk's office. And even though legally it is not something that clouds title, the attorney that guy used didn't know that. So he saw it as cloudy title and something that had to be resolved before they could sell the property, which worked out great for us because even though we didn't get the full commission, we still got paid for it. That's what happens when, paragraph B, when buyers try and play games, and C, when sellers try and play games. But that is what my understanding of this part of the contract means. Okay? The amount of the brokerage fee. The owner agrees that the brokerage fee will be, and this is where I have to be careful because not everywhere is the same commission-wise. So I'm going to just use a hypothetical example on what that might be. The owner agrees that the brokerage fee will be, pick a number, 6% of the gross selling price or a dollar figure. Okay? So that, for example, like with land, if you sell a piece of land for $15,000, you don't want to do a percent. You usually put a flat dollar fee as the total commission. Total commission is the listing side and the buyer side. All right? So this part is the first part, right? Now, it's also saying the gross selling price. There is a time when that doesn't apply, when it's the net selling price. The net selling price is if you had seller concessions. Seller concessions is where a buyer needs to finance some of their closing costs into their loan. So the amount that the seller gets is here. here's how much closing costs they need to finance, and then the purchase price, right? So that whole amount is your purchase price, which includes the amount going to the seller and then the seller concessions. In a case when you have seller concessions, sellers in our market are not billed a commission on the seller concession. So say it's a $200,000 home, you have $5,000, say $6,000 seller concessions. The net to seller offer or amount is $194,000. $194,000 is what the commission is based on, even though it says gross selling price. Okay? And then the next part. The commission offered by the broker to sub-agents shall be, so there are three different ways of doing it. Either you're a sub-agent, you're a buyer's agent, yeah, okay, and because there's also a broker's agent, but they don't have it in here. We never do sub-agents. We always do, so I always put 0 in the sub-agent. So if somebody wants to bring an offer and they're saying that they're working as a sub-agent, great, there's no commission. And that's the way that you encourage them to be a buyer's agent, okay? Because a sub-agent doesn't mean that they're representing their client. It means that it's different. So then in the buyer's agent shall be a percentage. So if it was 6 up here, maybe it's 3 down here, right? Or if it's a flat fee at the top, it'll be a flat fee, part of which part is for them, right? And then it says, if utilizing sub-agency, as described above, the owner will not be liable for more than one commission totaling whatever percent, like 6%. I usually just match it with what's at the top. We don't really do sub-agency, but rather than put not applicable and not applicable, we just put the same as what that top line has. Okay? All right. Questions in the chat or in the comments? Text, email, call. Subsequent purchase offers. This is the part where it says, well, what happens if we're already under contract and we get another offer? Do we accept or reject backup offers? Okay? What I tell my people is, if you want to accept backup offers and submit backup offers, that means that your property is still available to be shown. Do you still want people to come see the house and walk through and you have to get out even though we're already under contract? Not usually. So I usually recommend that they do the top one, refuse backup offers. And I tell them that because, number one, I'm going to call and ask you how you want to do it anyway, based on the scenario, whatever happens. But also that if we had multiple offers, we already have people we know are interested, so we could already have backup offers from them. Or sometimes people will call right after it goes under contract and say, oh my gosh, my people have been watching that house and they've just been waiting for it to go under contract. They should have asked, So can you let us know? Is it a solid deal? That's what they'll say. Can you let me know if it falls apart? Sure, I'll mark your name on my folder, and I will. It always cracks me up when people wait too long. Owners should consult with an attorney before accepting any subsequent purchase offers, as the owner may have additional liability associated with that. So you always got to make sure that, like if you're terminating one, that you don't accept an offer before the other one's terminated, because you can't sell the house twice. And both of them may be a legal binding contract, so you can get yourself in a bind. Check with your attorney if you disagree or want more info on that. And then the owners of the property will sign here. Oh, well, that's wrong because it says owner's signature, realtor's signature, but the blocks are in different spots. Oops. Not sure how that happened. on the new form. Anyway, on to the next form. Any questions? So that's essentially the listing agreement or the listing document. And then I've got some other ones down here that are EXP specific. There were some at the top as well. But this one is a fraud advisory notice. Again, look through this and read it and make sure you understand. The way I describe it is eXp Realty just wants you to know that if any time in this transaction or others you deal with wiring money, those instructions should be given to you in person or over the phone, not by email, because email can be hacked. And once you wire your money to the wrong place, it's gone. So sign this and I'm going to give you a copy. Questions? Read it again or check the websites. Okay, this one is an eXp Realty form. Honestly, this one's a little more, I find, annoying because eXp's parent company owns other real estate associated businesses, which include Success Lending, Laird's Title, and they have a business relationship with America's Preferred Warranty, which means that eXp could get kickbacks. That's a harsh word. Could be paid a referral fee if services were recommended from one or the other. And that we have to disclose those financial arrangements because that's the law, and that's why they're doing that. However, in addition to that, eXp parent company also wants you to know what those cost. That's the part I don't really like. I understand having to disclose it, but I don't know that we have to say, well, here's what our fee. Maybe shop around and pick us. Success Lending, I don't believe is in our market here. The title company, I'm not sure where they are or how that works either. Virginia, they have Virginia fees there listed. But usually I tell people, I have to tell you this, but none of this applies to our transaction. So if you could please sign it, that'd be great. And that's where they sign it here. Okay? Questions? And that wraps up the seller paperwork on the listing side. Okay? Thanks for watching.